Two teams coming off recent finals berths. Two teams looking to retool. The Phoenix Suns and the Toronto Raptors may be the partners in crime at this NBA trade deadline. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll break down the reports linking these two teams from all of the different directions and whether something might actually go down. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you all for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Wednesday. Welcome to another hump day for the Suns. Honestly, I wish I could tell you there was a light at the end of the tunnel this week, but there may not be. We may have to look toward the end of the month. Either way, I appreciate you spending your Wednesday here with me on Locked On Suns. Wherever you are finding the show, go ahead and hit subscribe, hit follow, get this show in your feed every single Monday through Friday to get up to date, stay up to date with your favorite team. You can also follow along at Locked On PHX Suns. And you're going to want to remember that because I have a giveaway coming up later in the show that we're going to talk through. There's a few things that I'm going to hit on today. And the first of them is this Raptors and Suns. It's flirting, it feels like. Dating, maybe not. Flirting, almost definitely. And it's coming from a few different directions. Today's show, guys, is brought to you by BetOnline with more odds, props, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is your number one source for sports betting info, news, and analysis. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so, and pardon me, I'm using my phone for notes today because my internet is just doing whatever, doing its own thing. It's all right. Jake Fisher had one report, Shams Charania had the other. We'll talk about the Shams side of things as it pertains to Fred VanVleet in a second. Want to start with Jake Fisher on the Raptors. He had a big feature news kind of, update analysis stuff. He's really good at those on the Toronto Raptors over at Yahoo today. And the Suns side of it really is that the Raptors still want a center, and so they were a team, a name we had talked about back in the summer around Ayton's free agency. It sounds like they still want a player. They didn't get one this summer. They don't really have anybody like that. And that they've looked specifically at Ayton, and they've looked specifically at Miles Turner. All right. And when you think about it, it makes sense, right? Christian Koloko, who people will know from the Valley, he was the U of A center during their run last year. The Raptors drafted him toward the end of the first round. He's a pretty promising player, but they don't seem to be thrilled with him as their long-term starter, it seems. He's their only real true center. They have a lot of guys like Chris Boucher, Precious Achiuwa, and then obviously Pascal Siakam, whose name you're probably already thinking about. They have Khem Birch. He's been benched. He's not, a starting caliber player in the NBA. And so here's the thing. The Raptors are in a situation where they have a lot of decisions. The Suns only factor into some of them. For instance, I don't really see the Suns getting in on OG Anunoby, right? That's a name we don't need to talk about. But when it does come to the Suns, I think you need to separate these rumors and the way you're thinking about it, and I'm separating the way I'm thinking about it into a couple different categories, all right? One is the Suns trading up. And I know we usually use that around the draft, but what I mean is trading, getting better, turning a bunch of decent things into a really good thing, or the Suns trading down when it comes to Ayton, all right? Meaning they turn him into lesser parts. Trading up, they add other stuff in a pot with Ayton to get something that they want. Trading down, they turn Ayton into a pot of stuff, all right? So if you're following me, that's where we are with the Raptors. Now, I want to start with Siakam, okay? That's the obvious one. That is going to get Suns fans' attention. That's going to get the whole league's attention, right? Anunoby, I think, is an interesting player. I understand the archetype that he presents and why he would be so valuable. I'm obviously not going to cast aspersions on that. I do think, though, from the Suns' standpoint, even though Anunoby's younger, even though whatever, he is firmly number 2 to Siakam. Everything I said on this show last week about Domantas Sabonis, which you guys took as Ayton hating, and it really wasn't. It was more so some perspective about the roster building philosophies of this front office and the fact that as you all and we watch this offense fall apart, James Jones seemed to see that coming. And so everything I said about Sabonis, I would reiterate when it comes to Pascal Siakam in this opportunity, okay? I think he fits beautifully. He's not quite as good of a passer, not quite as much of an offensive hub, I think, from a playmaking standpoint as Sabonis is, but I would say he's a better scorer overall, a better athlete. They're different types of ball handlers, but I would say that Siakam is a player who can sort of drive and isolate a little bit better, whereas Sabonis, he's going to score in the post. He's going to score off of dirty points, so to speak, those offensive rebound, put-back types of opportunities, quick post-ups, transition. But he's not really a big-time scorer, whereas Siakam is. But all that said, they're very similar in terms of guys who can occupy the spaces that Suns big men in this offense tend to occupy and create great offense out of that. And so the trade-up deal that I would see here, Ayton, Cam Johnson, and 2 or 3 first-round picks for Pascal Siakam. All right? That's going to be what it takes. That's similar to what we were talking about for Durant, although less on the pick side of things and less salary overall, so not quite as many players. But Siakam is a 28-year-old who I believe has already made one All-NBA team and is on his way toward a potential second or third. I don't know how many he has. Another one this season. That's a very valuable player, okay? Like, you look at what players tend to go for in this league. Donovan Mitchell's a little bit younger, but that's a comparative package. And so you're going to have to be starting from Ayton, Cam, and picks. And I think that's sort of where it goes. Now, a trade down deal, which I think also has some value, it could be something like, and we'll get into more versions of this in the next segment when we switch over to the Shams Charania report, something like Ayton for Fred VanVleet, Precious Achiuwa, Khem Birch, and a first-round pick. Probably a protected first-round pick, but you're getting VanVleet as sort of the best player. He's about to enter free agency. We'll talk about him more in a second. Achiuwa, who's like, probably not a blue chip prospect anymore. He struggled to stay on the floor a little bit. Not quite the shooter maybe people had hoped in the best version of him, but a very fascinating, very versatile player. And kind of a centerpiece in terms of a young guy. Birch would just be to match the salaries, and then you get a pick. And I think that would be perfectly valuable and solid as well. Now, the Suns don't quite have a center in that world, and maybe they have more moves to make. Notice Crowder I didn't put in any of these trades. I don't really think if the Raptors are resetting that they want half a season of Jay Crowder, really 2 months of Jay Crowder. I don't see what value that would have to them. So there would be more moves to come. I think either direction is fine, but as I mentioned, Fred VanVleet, I think that brings us to the next rumor. I just want to cap this off by saying the Raptors present a very fascinating partner in trades for a lot of teams because they have youth, but they also have big salaries. And so the very reason that everyone's so interested in Toronto, being that they can go in either direction, is exactly why other teams around the league want to know what they're going to do, because the Raptors could just as easily improve, trade for a superstar, as they could piecemeal and kind of strip down. Maybe they just want to keep Barnes and Anunoby, for instance, and everyone else is sort of available. And so the Suns, being that we don't quite know what direction they're going to go or who is available or on the block from a Phoenix standpoint, that's why this is so fascinating and why I do think you'll continue to hear more about these two teams. Let's get these Fred VanVleet rumors. The Suns reportedly interested in Fred VanVleet as a free agent going into next summer. So we need to talk about that, and maybe this Ayton stuff can factor into it. We'll get into all of it next. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by Rocket Money. If your New Year's goals are to manage your budget better and save money, you need to check out Rocket Money. Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill, is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills all in one place. Over 80% of people have subscriptions they forgot about, like that streaming service you bought just to watch one show on, or that free trial that you never even use. Rocket Money will quickly and easily identify subscriptions for you so you can stop paying for the ones that you don't want. Rocket Money makes canceling those subscriptions as easy as the click of a button. Simply find the subscription you don't want and press cancel, and Rocket Money will cancel it for you. No more long hold times with customer service or tedious emailing back and forth. The average user saves up to $720 per year. I've told you about my experience with a satellite radio subscription that I got for free from buying tickets to something, and then all of a sudden I'm paying them when month number 4 comes along. You've had an experience like that, I'm sure. So stop throwing your money away. Cancel unwanted subscriptions and manage all your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/lockedonnba. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedonnba. rocketmoney.com/lockedonnba. Shams Charania over at The Athletic had some reporting around Fred VanVleet. As I just got done saying, Toronto is very clearly in the news. His report is that the Suns are interested in Fred VanVleet come free agency. All right. I want to put that out there, but I also want to tell you to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because remember, Sun stuff rarely gets out, okay? It seems like Brian Windhorst maybe has the ear of James Jones a little bit. We don't really know. Brian has had quite a bit lately. Maybe that's changing, but until we really hear a lot more concrete stuff, I tend to believe the Suns are still pretty tight-lipped, and so it would surprise me if this was like fully true information that Fred VanVleet was just the apple of the Suns' eyes and it was just this open secret around the NBA. I kind of doubt that, especially when you think about it 6 months ahead of time for a player they can't even afford right now. And that's kind of where I want to start. VanVleet, according to Jake Fisher's piece, is expected to, he also had VanVleet. He didn't have the Suns part of it, but he did talk about VanVleet as well. He said, league rival executives, whatever, expect VanVleet to make somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 to $35 million on his next contract. He's turning 29 soon, so he's not old, but he's not, he's on the tail end of his prime. And even if the Suns, from a Phoenix standpoint, even if the Suns cut Chris Paul and Cameron Payne, traded Cam Johnson for nothing, and renounced all their free agents, they still don't have that much cap space, okay? I think they could get to, I don't even think it can clear $10 million with all of that. And you're talking about getting rid of a lot of good players for nothing. They still don't have anywhere near the cap space to offer Fred VanVleet $30 million, okay? That's where they are when you just consider they have Landry Shamet on the books next year, Devin Booker, Deandre Ayton, and Mikal Bridges. It just, there's not a lot of wiggle room beyond that. So that either means you disregard this completely and you just say Shams is, helping out Fred VanVleet's agent by pretending like there's maybe a market that there isn't here in Phoenix, or you start to look a little deeper and maybe a little bigger and maybe a little sooner than that. The Raptors don't want to fully bottom out if they keep Barnes and Anunoby, like I said in that last segment. Those guys don't really seem like they're on the table, and they probably shouldn't be. They're both either in their prime or about to be. That is a pretty dynamic duo at the forward spot in a league where those are positions of extreme value. And so maybe Chris Paul to Toronto, okay, yes, that's where I'm going, is an option for the next couple seasons that could make both sides happy here, all right? I don't know if the Suns are really going to explore Chris Paul trade. I mean, we've been talking for weeks on this show about can the Suns even get a Crowder deal done because it might be too big for Sarver to sign off on or for a new owner to jump right into a deal in time for the deadline. If you're thinking there's some questions about that size of a deal going through or a DeAndre Ayton size deal going through, trading Chris Paul, a franchise icon, even though it's only been 2 years, and a veteran who I think this is the most important part. If you just think about how Sam Presti and Oklahoma City handled the Chris Paul situation, I think there's a fair amount of attention on if you were to just disrespect Chris Paul and do this in a blindside type of way. I think other players around the NBA would see that and feel negatively about it. And so I don't know if we're there. All right. I also don't know really what Chris Paul's market would be for the other 29 teams or 28 teams in the NBA. But I do think for Toronto, it could possibly make some sense. Okay, the Suns need a younger guard. The Raptors need a center. And so if we circle back on this potential interest in VanVleet on the part of the Suns, we know the Raptors also need a center. Why not both? I'm saying both. It's really like three things at once here. I want to give a tip of the hat to Sean Woodley, the guy who does our wonderful Locked On Raptors host here on the network, and he sent me a very complicated trade that involved Gary Trent and VanVleet and Ayton and Paul and some picks and Kem Birch and Chris Boucher and I don't know what else. A deal that big is always going to be less likely than we might think, but again, these teams just make so much sense together. Maybe it's not an Ayton thing. Maybe it's VanVleet and Chris Paul is sort of the centerpiece. If the Raptors don't see themselves wanting to pay VanVleet long-term, if they want to take a step back and maybe see what an offense that maybe runs a little bit more through Scotty Barnes and OG Anunoby might look like, or maybe they keep Siakam and they want to, move things that way and they get more of a shooter and defender types at the guard spots. There's all sorts of ways. Again, the Raptors, they can go multiple directions with this. Maybe Chris Paul makes sense as somebody there who, can be that table setter, be a shooter and playmaker, ball mover, leader in that reset of a franchise. He's still going to make his money. Toronto's not a bad place. They're not going to be bottoming out. This would be sort of like the Oklahoma City chapter for him. Again, I don't know the mechanics and the politics behind the scenes, but I'm just telling you that from a roster standpoint, from a salary standpoint, from a trade machination standpoint, these two teams make sense, and Chris Paul makes some sense as part of it. Now, there is some downside to Fred VanVleet, and I want to be realistic with that. We'll get into some Suns news specifically following up on that Memphis game here in just a second. But the last thing on VanVleet, he's kind of similar to Chris Paul, okay? He is another undersized point guard who might be listed at 6 feet plus, but is probably more like 5'10 or 5'11, and who relies on his jumper a fair bit. And so when you think about what's gone wrong with the Suns at times, it's that they're very reliant on jump shots going in and that their defense is pretty exploitable when teams go mismatch hunting, whether it's Luka Doncic, whether it's Giannis Antetokounmpo, whether it's even some regular season matchups that we've seen go south for this team. And Fred VanVleet would pose a lot of those same problems. There's a reason he's been very successful on a Raptors team that between Lowry, Siakam, Kawhi Leonard, whoever you want to, OG Anunoby, that has these versatile defensive parts, and he can just really be a point of attack defender and a playmaker shooter at the point guard spot, and everything else is kind of taken care of for him. That wouldn't be the case with the Suns, and I think that's something to be worried about. Again, he's also about to be 29. He's not quite on Booker's timeline. And so unless it was something where you're exchanging Chris Paul Or maybe there is an Ayton trade where you're getting somebody like Achua that makes, and maybe a pick that starts to check a few more boxes. But if I'm the Suns, I am assuredly not in an aggressive chasing after Fred VanVleet type of mode. When you think about that 30 to 35 million number, the fact that you're either going to have to trade for him and pay him, or even just pay him, which I don't believe is realistic from a cap space standpoint, you're making a big investment in a player like that, and I don't think he's enough of an answer to what is a problem here in Phoenix that I'm going to go out of my way to pursue him. One guard that is on this team that is confusing me, frankly, just as much as it pertains to his playing time, his status on this team, is Duane Washington Jr. We'll talk about his DNP right after another quick break. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by BetOnline. More stats than anyone out there to get you ready for divisional round weekend now, the pro basketball stretch run, whatever you love. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis for all of your favorite sports and leagues. Get the latest odds and trends for every pro and amateur league out there. Again, divisional round weekend, the NBA stretch run, the Australian Open is going on. I know tennis is an awesome sport to bet on because there's just no shortage of matches. And if you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well to get that upper leg. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info, so head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. That's betonline.net. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's close out with Duane Washington Jr.'s DNP in this game against Memphis. A few things just to get out of the way so that it doesn't seem like I don't understand reality, all right? The Suns actually, even with their injuries right now, Payne, Booker, and Chris Paul off the court with injuries, they actually have guard is actually a spot where they do still have some depth, much more than forward, the wing, whatever. They have, obviously, Lee and Shamet. Those guys are getting minutes no matter what, especially with these injuries. They have Duane Washington, who we're talking about. They have Saben Lee on a 10-day, who ended up getting the nod over Duane Washington in the rotation against Memphis. And then they even have a guy like Josh Okogie, who's going to defend guards most of the time. Mikal Bridges defends guards a lot. Like they have players like that. And so it's not crazy to me that he would get a DNP. When you look at the fact Washington, there's enough other options that Washington might not play, and yet Ish Wainwright's getting like a given 15 to 20 minutes a night lately. I think that shows guard, they have some depth still, forward not so much. And then I also think you have to be honest and say, playing against Ja Morant, you want a point of attack defense and you want ball handling. And so Suns fans were very frustrated, and it even broke through to, Dwayne Rankin asking about it in Memphis. It was puzzling. It was. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. The minutes, the rotation, the usage of Duane Washington all season has been puzzling, and this was just kind of the latest chapter of it, and I get it. I think all those things are true. I still think it surprised me to not see Washington out there. I want to tell you what Monty Williams said. He said, quote, Saben has been a guy for us who's defended and he's gotten into the paint. And then he basically went on to say they just wanted to try something different today. Okay? To me, the defense and Monty emphasizing the defense kind of tells me all that I need to know because we know what Duane Washington's limitations are. It's one thing to have the turnovers and the missed shots. I think that's sort of what you live with a young point guard, with a young scoring guard. But we already knew Duane Washington was going to be a liability on defense. And so to me, he has to be so good on offense, so consistent on offense, and so focused and committed on defense to earn the trust of Monty that it's not a surprise he hasn't been playing. Now, I think the thing you might pick nits with is whether the bar should be so high for him, considering that the Suns just don't have a ton of other amazing options. Now, I just said they have other options, but Duane Washington over Josh Okogie, Duane Washington over Saben Lee. Saben Lee wasn't even on this team 2 weeks ago, he also mentioned, Monty, that Saben Lee, he was hopeful that Saben Lee could continue to improve with this Suns team. So far, Saben Lee has just 3 turnovers in 57 minutes of playing time. He's shooting 50% from the field, and he's played pretty solid defense. Now, John Morant was making fun of him, doing the "he can't guard me" song. Whatever. Ja can do what he wants. It was a little bit funny that he's doing that when a 10-day player is struggling to keep him in check. I don't know what that was all about. But aside from a possible MVP candidate, Saben Lee has handled most of his assignments. I think you can see the aggressiveness on the ball. He doesn't necessarily create a ton of steals, but you could see that coming in time as he starts to learn the league and game plans and all the rest. And he's still just 23 years old. So when I hear Monty say he's hopeful that he could continue to improve, and I look at how decently he's played and the fact that he's still pretty young, the fact that the Suns had him here in training camp and preseason, he's also a local kid. All of that makes me wonder if, looking past this DNP, Monty and James Jones might be looking at Saben Lee as a potential guy to spend the rest of the season here. And that might sound crazy to you. Maybe it is crazy. Maybe he'll leave after this 10-day contract and I'll sound like an idiot. But you don't say a lot of long-term stuff like that about a 10-day player. And Monty did. And he's playing him over Duane Washington, who has had some pretty big moments for this team, including against Memphis in a win just last week or so. So I don't want to overreact to this. I do think it matters. It's not nothing. And I wouldn't be surprised if it continues and maybe we're talking about Duane Washington being waived or Ish Wainwright being waived and maybe Saben Lee taking one of the two-way spots for this team. Or maybe after the dust settles around the trade deadline, maybe the Suns decide to add Lee on a rest of season contract. There's a lot of options. They still have an open roster spot even before any Crowder or any bigger trades than that. So more to come here. Keep an eye on it. Keep an eye on how Lee's playing. Keep an eye on how Washington's playing. And more than anything, keep an eye on which one of them Monty Williams trusts. All right, before we get out of here, we have a giveaway. All right? This is from the 90s night, one of the more recent 90s nights. I washed it. It is a size large, I believe, but it fits much better. It's a medium. It's reasonable in terms of size compared to the huge gowns that you get at sporting events sometimes where they're throwing them and it's a double XL and no one in the house can even go in public with it without looking ridiculous. It's a medium size, so that's there. What you need to do to be eligible to win this 90s shirt: 1, listen to the end of this podcast. I'll plug it one more time today this week before the week is over, but I'm going to keep it at the end of the podcast. And you need to put a 5-star review on Apple and then send me, well, I will be able to keep an eye on them, but I will pick one. And you will need to send me your contact info. So you will have to keep listening because I will announce the winner next Monday with Brandon here. And it will be only people who submit a 5-star review. You can leave a comment about the show, leave a favorite memory of the show, whatever you want to do, some sort of personalized note with a 5-star review. I will randomly pick one winner by the best comment, announce it next Monday, and then you will need to get me your contact info, all right? Because obviously an Apple username is not going to allow me to get you the shirt mailed. But that's the deal. 5-star review, memory, debate. You can argue with me. You can leave some analysis. You can joke, whatever you want. I'm not going to put any rules on it, and I will pick the best comment. I'm not going to just glom onto one that agrees with me or whatever. You guys can have some fun with it. I'm going to pick the one. I know I said randomly. It won't be random. I will pick the best one, and then you will need to tell me your address and all that stuff. I'll get it mailed out to you, and this shirt will be at your house by next week. It's that easy. Tell a friend if you want to do that. Whatever you want to do. We want to get the show boosted up those charts. It's a rough time in the season, and I want to get you guys this shirt because it's super soft. It's super nice, way, way, way better than most giveaway shirts are, and of course has that classic sunburst and the old-fashioned vintage look. So that'll wrap us up today. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen. Hit follow or subscribe. You're going to want to hear the winner on Monday, so you got to stay posted for that. In the meantime, go make Locked On Sports Today your second listen here on this Wednesday to get caught up on everything going on around the world of sports. That show available on all podcast platforms, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.